I got to ask you, why on earth would North Korea start firing and attacking a joint military exercise that's routine for the U.S. and South Koreans? Why would they do that, especially in light of the strength that President Obama has shown to Vladimir Putin in regard to the annexation of the Crimean Peninsula, Crimea as we know it, and the troops that have been, till as of just reported, 100,000 on the border of eastern Ukraine? Why? Well, to get answers on these issues, we go to a man who can tell us the answers and explain it to us so we can all understand it. His name is Gordon Chang. He is a contributor to Forbes. He is a contributor to the National Interest, and he is the author of The Coming Collapse of China. Welcome back, Gordon. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Crane. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming back on. And why is North Korea doing this?
There's a couple of reasons. First of all, North Korea does not like the annual South Korea-U.S. military exercises, so they always engage in provocative behavior this time of year. And as well, last week, President Obama hosted a meeting with his Japanese and South Korean counterparts in The Hague. North Korea didn't like that either, so clearly they're trying to express their displeasure. Also, the North Koreans have been testing all sorts of missiles, Scuds, long-range ballistic, intermediate-range ballistic missiles, and rockets recently. And they've been doing that in part because they've got to show that their customers, the Iranians and the Pakistanis, that the products work. So a lot of it is product demonstration as well.
Let's carry that connection real quick, and then I want to ask you about what they're talking about with the nuclear situation there, another test that something we haven't seen yet. Missile technology. Tell me about the relationship between the nuclear program in Iran and the missile technology program in North Korea.
Well, North Korea has two joint programs with Iran. One is for the development of nuclear weapons. The other is for intermediate and shorter-range ballistic missiles, perhaps also long-range ballistic missiles as well. Now, for instance, if you scrape the paint off an Iranian Shahab-3 missile, it is a North Korean Nodong missile. And a Nodong missile is important because they just tested a couple of those last week. So clearly the North Koreans are showing the Iranians, that their new upgraded products work. And this is going to be important because there is this flow of missiles and technology and weapons from North Korea to Iran. And we also saw that the North Koreans have been selling this stuff, the missiles, to the Pakistanis, and they've been selling nuclear technology to the Syrians. So this is a very dangerous connection.
Okay, and right now I remember that President Bush was ripped when he said the axis of evil, Iraq, North Korea, and Iran. He was saber rattling, whatever. Okay, it's just basically Bush criticism of how he's trying to provoke others, and that causes others to actually respond in a more aggressive way. Well, I guess weakness would invite aggression as opposed to identifying the axis of evil. But number one, do you agree with the original axis of evil statement? And is there a new axis, and how do the powers of Russia and China factor into that new axis, if there is a new axis?
Yeah, clearly the Russians and the Chinese have formed a durable partnership, and I think that we can certainly call it an axis. We've seen, for instance, of course, both Russia and China grab territory from their neighbors. So we've got two large authoritarian states, territorially aggressive. They're working very closely with each other. And this is important because the Chinese have been sponsoring the Iranians and the North Koreans and the Pakistanis. The Russians have chimed in, of course, because they also support Iran. So what you have is a web of countries that is very dangerous right now.
With Syria, if I'm not mistaken, there was a nuclear reactor that was taken out by the Israelis in the
You're
last
certainly
decade?
not mistaken,
Okay.
Crane, because in September 2007, the Israelis, in an airstrike, destroyed a reactor in the middle of the Syrian desert. It was a North Korean reactor. There are reports that there were North Korean technicians on site, and probably all of that was paid for by Iran. So you're absolutely 100% right about that. So this is not just North Korea and Iran. This is Iran sending this technology to its allies as well.
Okay. So Gordon, if I'm looking for a comprehensive strategy against our new enemy, now I'm looking to identify our new enemies, enemy and enemies. And first and foremost, I look at obviously Shia Iran, but I can put Islamofascism in the same boat. Restoration or the attempt for a worldwide caliphate, one with a genocidal Armageddon, nuclear, bringing on the 12th Imam, Shia, Sunni, the other way of conquest. I can look at that, and please correct me if I'm wrong in trying to put these into some type of perspective, because then I look over at communist Russia and China, and I think, okay, they're on the same plan in the sense of they want to increase their power, and we see that with Vladimir Putin. We certainly have seen that with China and its treatment of its neighbors and our allied friends in the region, in the neighborhood. So how would you break it down? Because I see those, and then I've got North Korea, and I've got Pakistan, already nuclear capable. They already have nuclear weapons. It sounds like a really dangerous mix. If we're looking at that, first off, identify our enemies. Secondly, explain a fundamental strategy that would apply to all of them in the sense of a general way to look at and defend ourselves.
I think our primary adversaries are going to be Russia and China, because they give strength to countries like Iran, North Korea, Pakistan, Syria. Of course, Iran is an extremely dangerous state, but it couldn't stand up against the international community if it didn't have the backing of both Moscow and Beijing. And you've got to remember that the Chinese have not only been supporting it diplomatically and also commercially by buying its oil and gas, but also the Chinese have been giving the Iranians nuclear weapons materials and technology directly. So this is a serious situation where, I think that it's essentially the two big, large states are the ones that we have to be most concerned about. In terms of a strategy, I think that first of all, we have to understand who our adversaries are, because we had this notion at the end of the Cold War that, China and Russia had the same interests that we did. We could always sit down at the table with them and solve problems. Well, that's proven not to be the case, because China and Russia have been the problem. They haven't been part of the solution, which means that we are in for a very long period of dealing with both the Chinese and the Russians, who present different threats. But nonetheless, I think that we need to oppose them economically. We need to oppose them from a diplomatic viewpoint and from a military viewpoint as well. We have to make it very clear that they cannot continue paths of aggression, and both of them have been on the war path.
Something that was comprehensive, certainly in its nature, was the way we fought the Cold War. And part of that was the Reagan ability to characterize our enemies and what they stood for, and talking about, okay, hey, here's why we're right, here's why you're wrong. And really locking that in with a moral alliance. Certainly, if we look at Poland 81 and the Solidarity movement, looking for that moral base to say, hey, this is what we believe, here's why we're right, here's why you will fail. He identified the ideological part of it. He certainly identified and understood the strength military part of it as well with his own. He brought back the Reagan Doctrine, if you will, the Monroe Doctrine in the sense of our hemisphere with communism. I mean, this is what he was about. And to me, we have a president that is not talking about freedom. And even when challenged about the breakup of the Soviet Union being the worst thing that has happened, in the words of Vladimir Putin, not taking that opportunity to exploit that and say, you know why you fell? Because communism does not work. You couldn't keep up with us. You couldn't keep up with a country that was about freedom and liberty. Tell me something. Does there need to be a central message in our communication? And is President Obama, maybe I'm wrong, is he hitting that message when it comes to our enemies as well as our allies?
Well, the central message is what you mentioned. You know, Ronald Reagan said, our strategy for the Cold War is simple. We win, they lose. That's got to be the way that it is, because those two countries are destabilizing the international system. They're trying to take territory from neighbors. They're proliferating nuclear weapons technology, and they're supporting the worst elements in the international community. Now, President Obama is not taking those steps that are necessary to oppose Moscow and Beijing. That's probably because his policy is based upon essentially the common assumptions that both parties have shared since the end of the Cold War, that these are large countries that have a common interest with the United States that we can work with. That paradigm, which has dominated thinking in Washington now for more than 2 centuries, is absolutely wrong. You know, we have seen it wrong so many times in the last 2 or 3 years, and yet we don't change our policies. That's our fault. And it's not just President Obama's problem. It was President Bush's problem before that, and it was basically Republicans and Democrats together.
Tell me, as you're shaping this, you're saying, understand that the little dogs, though lethal as they can be, and dangerous, obviously, you got to go after the big dogs, and those are China and Russia. And,
absolutely.
And to do that, you have to speak directly to them, but you also have to take care of our allies. What would you do for our allies?
We have to make it very clear, for instance, when the Chinese try to grab territory of the Japanese, the Senkakus in the East China Sea, we have to make it very clear. We need the President of the United States to say in public, as well as in private, in public, that the United States will defend Japan. We have a mutual defense treaty, and we will use all means necessary to do so. We need to show the Chinese that aggression doesn't work. Unfortunately, we haven't done that. We haven't done that in this administration. We didn't do it in the past administration. And so therefore the Chinese think that adventurism might just pay off for them. Well, it can't. It can't if you have a Ronald Reagan type figure who is going to say, we win, they lose, freedom triumphs. Those are very clear messages. We have forgotten them, and we have to get back to where we were. You're absolutely right about that, Crane.
Well, tell me this. In your article referencing 1937, as opposed to it being 1939 and looking at peace in our time, you talk about the fact that these things, there can be a conflict that can grow and very much get out of control very quickly. Please explain why it's 1937 as opposed to 1939 as people are looking for historical analogies.
Yeah, in 1937, the Japanese were grabbing more and more territory from China. And there was a feeling in Chinese circles that although Chiang Kai-shek, the Chinese leader, did not have the means to resist Japan, he had no choice but to fight, because if he didn't fight, the Japanese were going to dismember China. Well, today you have exactly the same dynamic, except that the Chinese are the aggressors, and they are grabbing more and more territory from, for instance, the Philippines. So you're going to have countries on China's periphery going to be forced into the same decision that Chiang Kai-shek made in 1937, and that is to resist a territorially aggressive Beijing through force of arms, because they have no choice, because the Chinese are trying to dismember their countries. And so that's the dynamic we have today. That's 1937, where you have weak countries standing up to big ones because they have no choice.
Tell me, is the old paradigm of mutually assured destruction alive and well when it comes to the understanding of not only the Russians but also the Chinese when it comes to dealing with the United States and nuclear weapons?
Well, we have let the concept of deterrence erode. So, for instance, when we have the Chinese threaten to kill tens of millions of Americans, they do this in public. They gloat about it, and we do not respond. Well, when we don't respond, the concept of deterrence erodes. That's one of the worst things that can possibly happen. It's really bad when your adversaries don't respect you, and right now the Chinese don't respect us. They think that they can push us around. They've been thinking this for more than a decade now, so it's not just the problem of the Obama administration. They pushed the Bush administration around as well. And Putin pushed Bush around with regard to, for instance, Georgia. taking big chunks of Georgia and the United States not responding. So we shouldn't be surprised that he's taking a big chunk out of Ukraine, and God knows where he's going to stop. So at some point, he's not going to stop until we stop him. And that's the unfortunate fact, that unfortunately, Russia is not our friend, and what we need to do is undermine that country as we need to undermine China, because they are both territorially aggressive and they both threaten the international system.
I just wish I had 3 hours to talk to you. Gordon Chang, thank you. You're amazing. I would like to post your latest article on the Facebook with your permission.
Of course.
And I will do that, and I look forward to talking with you real soon. Thank you for taking the time. Great to be with you.
And thank you so much, Crane.
Take care. Gordon.